Hi everybody. So nice to see you, to have you here with me today. It's week 8. It's still winter. It's cold, but we're here. I'm having my pot of tea because, well, we need that sometimes. We are here for week 8 of the Quilters Playcation Adventure Sewalong Rainbow Edition. I'm a little behind today, not gonna lie, so bear with me, but it's okay. It's an easy block today. I literally just made the first one in like 5 minutes. So it will take us longer because you know me, I'll be chit-chatting and it'll take us longer. So hello to everybody joining us live. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. If you are joining us from anywhere, whether that's on Instagram or YouTube later, happy that you're here. Before we get going, I need to show something. I'm very excited about this. This is, did I show this to you last week? I can't remember if I did or not. That is last year's Quilters Playcation Adventure Sewalong quilt top, the abstract version. So if you followed along last year and you saw the blocks we made, this was the one I was making that was sort of inspired by in terms of shapes and maybe even colors, but it was a very abstract version, less of a literal treasure map. So I finished the last row the other day, and yesterday I was feeling motivated. So I vacuumed the floor, quick quilt back. And when I was looking for pieces of binding, I had one piece that was actually already folded, and it was the perfect width. And so I decided I'm going to experiment, and I kept it folded. So I actually have a double layer of batting. This is the select weight of Quilter's Dream batting, so it's lighter. It is their thinnest loft, so it's a light loft. So I would say it feels kind of wool batting-ish, a little bit heavier, but thickness wise, I have a plan for some kind of funky straight line quilting on it. So we'll see how it goes, but it is basted and ready to go. So I'm excited about that. As for this week and our block, just going to show you, I have my top row assembled. Let's see if I pull you back a little bit. You can see the whole row pretty close. My top rows are all assembled. I stitched them together in a bout of insomnia last week. So they're all together. I'm just going to point out right here, the little red strip. That block was just a little bit short. And so rather than remake the block right there, I decided I would just add a little strip. In my head, I went, well, I've got monochromatic. I'll start in rainbow colors. I may just stick with the red. It was an ombre from Victoria Christensen with the gold dot. My daughter, who's already claimed that quilt, is gunning for, actually, she like wanted a burgundy, and I thought, oh, I could kind of go into that more sort of shaded idea of a rainbow. So if I have a short block in the second row, I will do like maybe like a rusty orangey kind of color. We'll see what happens. It's improv, starting without knowing where we're going to end up. As for today's block, this is what we have going on. Just kind of a ray going to the side. It's super easy. We just have to, we've got 5 seams. We're going to cut a wedge of each one of our rainbow fabrics. There is some understanding of how long the wedges need to be because they don't all need to be the same length. So because I'm behind, meaning I didn't get my fabrics cut for this, I only just finished making the block before I came on live. So I don't have my other fabrics cut, but that's good because I'm going to show you what you need to factor into to decide how much to cut. So we're minimizing scraps. We're just going to use what we have. We will have some scraps because you will have to trim this up. And to make it easier to make the block, it's just the way it goes. It's no big deal. You know me, we'll use the scraps. In fact, next week's block is going to be about using scraps. So there we go. With that, let's head over to the cutting table. Oh, see the mess behind the camera. I'm fully honest about all of this. All right, a little bit of tea. Now we'll switch this around. We will say hello to the ladies, and we will come down here on the cutting table. The sun has come out, so we have a little sunbeam affecting us today. We were having a bit of a blizzard-ish conditions this morning. So these are my scraps from making that previous block. Trimmings, don't throw them out, never throw them out. We will probably make use of those next week. As for the rest of our rainbow fabrics, here we go. I want to, ooh, I'm missing, where'd the pink go? The pink has not made it into the pile. She's just on the other side of the room. Okay. I want to actually have these in the rainbow order because the two outside ones get cut one side, the second ones get cut one side, and the middle ones get cut one size. Sorry, I'm saying side, one size. So it's just easier to have them in that order. And I'm actually going to be a little bit more efficient, and I'm going to layer my fabrics. So I just want to have them so I'm only cutting kind of from the end. Still have the thing from the store on there. You can unfold them if you need to, which I do here, because I'm going to cut a rectangle from the end here. How big of a rectangle do you need to cut? It really depends on the size of your blocks that you have, because in this case, I'm going to just cut my rectangle right from that edge there. So I'm just going to layer them. It's not super precise cutting, let's be clear. But we're just going to have them kind of stacked on top of each other. So it depends on what size block you have. Let's use the one that I made as an example. You're going to take a block that is the size that you're doing. So these monochromatic blocks are 9.5-inch squares. I'm 10.5-inch squares for these. So what you're going to do for these two outside rays, we know we want to square up to 9.5 inches. We want to give ourselves some wiggle room so we're not short. So I'm going to cut about an inch bigger than I need, because these are going to be more or less outlining the block. So they're pretty close to what we need already, but I want to give myself some wiggle room. So I'm not going to cut exactly to 9.5 inches. 10 inches, that ½ inch extra, you might end up being a little bit short. So give yourself an extra inch. As for width, again, because we're taking these on an array, we need some width. And how wide you want your stripes will really kind of depend on you. These ones ended up a bit narrower than these, but you can cut them sort of 3 to 4 inches ish. Again, if you're making 12.5-inch blocks, you're going to probably want to cut those maybe 4 to 5 inches. Give yourself that wiggle room to play with everything. So this first round, because my blocks are 10.5 inches, when I'm done, when it comes to my pastel rainbow, I want to cut these, 11.5 inches ish. So I'm just kind of putting this on here and checking. I'm at 11 inches here, but I've got salvage. So I just want to move that down a little bit. Yes, it's wrinkly. I know. Don't worry. So now when I come to here, let's move that just a little bit more. Let's give myself a wiggle room. I should have cut that salvage off already. There's the edge of my fabric. Oh, now I have too much. All right, just trying to minimize any scraps, but also not stress too much about scraps. So I'm at about 12 inches. I'm just going to go for it. Of course, now there's my rotary cutter. So I'm just going to kind of cut off the salvage there. And I'm going to use my ruler to kind of go up here, and then I'll just freehand cut at that end. Remember, we'll be trimming off all of that stuff. I didn't get my corners very well. That's okay. I can either use that with my rotary cutter, because again, we're not cutting super precise here, so it's okay if it's not super precise, or there's like a little, you know, we have little bits like that and stuff like that. So that's my outside bits. Now we're going to do the second layer. Again, I want to fold, which is totally fine. Now this time I'm going to want them longer, because I'm going to make my life easier, and I have that extra little bit there. We're going to want these longer because they have more distance to travel, basically, to make this diagonal line. So you're going to take your ruler, and on something that's the size you want, you're going to measure, right? And see, okay, on the exact one, what is it? So in my case, sort of corner to kind of part way is about 10 3/4 on my 9.5 inch one. I don't have a freestanding block from my previous one, but I can just take my ruler, right? So I see my 9.5 inch mark, my 9.5 inch mark, and I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. How that's about 11.5 inches. So I'll cut 12 and a little bit. Give myself that wiggle room as well. Now you can layer these, or you can cut them on their own. Layering seemed to take longer, so I'll just cut it on its own. So basically these second ones are going to be, you know, a little bit longer. It's blue. Green and yellow are my center ones. So I need blue. That piece is not going to be long enough, so I will cut from here. Again, I still have my label on from the store. You know, if I have some little uneven bits, I'm not going to stress about them, because they're all going to get trimmed up. Have a little fold there. Right, gave myself lots of wiggle room on that piece. And then I will cut the center ones. We will do the same thing. We're going to measure for how long it needs to be. So in this case, right, let's remember this is a 12.5 inch ruler I'm measuring off of. So 9.5 inches is right here on this line. If I go essentially corner to corner, you know, what is that measurement? And it's 13.5. So I'm going to cut a little bit longer than my 14 inch ruler. Just again, give myself that wiggle room. We will be trimming it off, right? It is going to get trimmed off and cut down, and we will have scraps, and that's fine. Okay. It's okay to have scraps. It's okay to make scraps. So this piece here, then it's not big enough. So I'm actually going to go here on the fold, and because I know I want 14 and a bit and it's on a fold, I'm just going to cut kind of 7 and a little bit. So you can see this is an insight into me cutting for improv. It's quite often not all that precise. I don't get fussed or hung up on leftovers or the perception of waste, because I don't believe there is such a thing as waste when it comes to our quilting fabrics, because it's all potential for something else. Here. So let's see what I got again on my fold here. Not quite enough. So what I'm going to do is, you see how I have this kind of extra bit here? I'm actually just going to trim that off and add it to the scrap pile. Probably get used at some point. Not a big deal. And then I'll cut my, 14 and a bit inch piece here. The reason I'm not too worried about whether it's totally straight on either one of these edges is because we're going to be cutting fresh lines before we sew together. Okay. I'm also not worried about on grain, because like most of our improv work, I just don't stress about that. We're not making garments that need to hang right. And pressing can make a lot of not on grain things work. So, did that make sense to everybody with the cutting? Now you'll see, I'm going to give these all actually a quick press because they're a bit wrinkly. So just get those folds out and everything. Make them a little bit happier. Just means that when we go to assemble them, they're a little bit happier and more, it's just going to make a cleaner cut. And that one had that fold. Once I get some flatter on that later on, we'll be good. Oh, I was going to say my green disappeared, but I see it. Okay, that one's a bit wrinkly. Okay, I am low on water in there, so I'm just going to top that up so it's steamy and good for the next step. All right, so I just want to show you how this is going to come together, right? So we have our purple kind of laying on the bottom. Let's move that over. Have our purple laying on the bottom, and then we're going to add a blue, you know, a green, or whatever your rainbow order is, right? We're going around. So you could easily cut wedges. I don't like to do that, and it's not my recommendation. It's possible, but it's easier to not have this end up being the right size, and you get hung up on using the angle of the wedges that you've cut. I just find it's easier to cut these kind of as you go. So you can see that this is a lot shorter here. That's normal. That's okay, because we're going to actually be squaring up in here, but we need to make sure we have that length right there. So there will be trimmings afterwards. Totally fine. Totally fine. So we're only going to work adding one strip at a time. So I'm going to go ahead and layer my fabrics right sides up, and then I'm going to make a nice fresh angled cut for that first wedge cut. So it took off that little bit there, and it leaves me with that bit of purple and not really a wedge of blue. It will become a wedge when I sew the next one or trim for the next one. And this is what I trimmed off. Totally fine. Save it. We'll use it next week. Okay. So we cut right sides up, and then we sew right sides together. Just flip the one on top over. And you're going to sew it down with a nice straight seam, as straight as you can be. I'm never perfect either, for that first wedge there. Now I want you to go ahead and give this a good press. A finger press is not quite enough at this point, okay? Because the whole block is going to lay flatter if we press as we go. So don't wait to press. I just wanted to show you that there. Normal pressing rules apply. Didn't think you needed to see it. So there we go. There's that first wedge. Now we're going to grab our green, because that's the next in my rainbow, and we're going to add this wedge to it. I'm more concerned with making sure I have enough over here than I am with how it meets at the corner. You may end up kind of overlapping like this. I think that's what I did on the first one. You may pull this back and have a little bit more. If you want to give yourself an idea, once you've laid it down, is this going to work? Take your ruler or your template or your existing block, and I'm just going to place it over knowing that this is kind of my 9.5 inch mark and this is my 9.5 inch mark. And what does it look like on that 45, right? I only have a 45-degree line on this ruler in the opposite direction, so it doesn't help me. But you know, if I do that, I've got quite a bit of wiggle room, right? So I'm staying on size. It's worth checking as you go to kind of give you a little bit more. And I have enough in size so much though that I'm actually going to move that a little bit. And then I'm going to cut a new wedge. I want to make sure, yeah, see if I'd cut there, I wouldn't have had enough blue. In fact, I'm going to switch that so that I can see where I will have enough. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead, make that cut. Again, scraps that we can be used next week. Only trimmed off a tiny little bit from there. Then I'm going to go ahead and sew this piece down. And our block's half done at this point. You're going to want to press that. If you're me, you're going to want another sip of tea. Although that one's gotten a little bit cool, so I'm just going to top myself up a little. But there you go. You can see that wedge coming through. Is this making sense to everybody? I hope so. My husband and I always, it's one of the moments where we probably bicker the most, is that the brain dump of information. So he will explain something and in his head it makes perfect sense, and then in my head I'm like, I don't understand what you're trying to say, and all he does is explain it the same way again, and it infuriates me. So we're constantly, that's probably one of the things that as people who work together, we bicker about the most. So I want to make sure that I'm explaining it in a way that makes sense to everybody. So again, we're layering all of this, still making sure, you know, where I'm going to be. Oh yeah, I'm doing great. Still within that 10.5 inch. Right. Just going to layer those right sides up, give myself a nice fresh cut. And yes, my ruler was just ever so slightly short. That's fine. I just kind of went as straight as I could off the end. There we go. Drinking tea while I stitch. I think that you should be able to guide a seam one-handed. Two is better, but one-handed sewing works just as well. However, when I stop to take a sip, I stop my machine, because that's when you're going to go wonky. Okay. The fourth one is on, and then we just have to add the last two. Steam has kicked in from iron, so I'm a little bit happier now. See, coming together. Orange is next. I just about put pink on, right? So now this is where it's going to look a little bit funky. You're going to see that this isn't going to line up at the top. That's okay. That's totally fine, totally normal. It's because this wasn't cut long enough, and I don't want it to line up because then I'm going to have so much that I cut off. But I am going to double check and say, okay, well, if I go from the bottom and let's say if I place this orange one right here, how tall will this block be? Well, right now it'll be 11.5 inches with wiggle room. So it's more than tall enough. So it's okay, is what I'm saying, to have that jump there. I'm going to go ahead and trim, right? Layering our fabrics right sides up, trimming that piece, and then going ahead, flipping that back over to sew. Alrighty. So there we go. Press that, and then we'll cut and attach our last piece. Alrighty. And then the last one. So now this one's going to look, you know, from this angle, kind of straight and awkward because you have all these like rays. But remember, we will cut this and then it will get trimmed as well. So I just wanted to make a comment here about this kind of intersection. I can go ahead and line this up so that it's over here on the edge, so that we really get to see kind of all of the fabrics coming from the point. But you can also, any one of these, layer over the corner and change the way that looks. You'll see I did that on this one, right? The black kind of covers it over, this gray piece covered over the corners there. It's an anything goes scenario. It's improv work. Remember that. Anything goes. In this one, I think I am going to go for roughly trying to maintain that point. So I'm going to go there, and I'm going to give myself that fresh cut. It will, of course, change depending on where you place the ruler when we square up the block. But this will give me lots of choices. Drinking my tea while it's still hot. Yes! I won it, thread chicken. My bobbin warning light has been on for a few seams, so never quite sure how far it's going to go, but I got my seam done. So as usual, I will press this last seam, and then I'll show you the block. And in this case, we are definitely going to square this one up for you, because it doesn't look like a block right now, right? It kind of looks like chaos. Not chaos, it's organized. But it doesn't have the effect, the full effect that we're hoping for in this particular block until it gets squared up, right? So there we go. That's what we have, right? Our nice rainbow coming from the corner. I'm going to take my ruler now and I'm going to show you. So I want 10.5-inch blocks. Where I can play around. In this case, I had been measuring for 9.5, I just realized, when I needed 10.5, but I'm good. I gave myself enough wiggle room. See, wiggle room is good. It allows you some freedom of movement. So I can play around with where I place my ruler because I have that wiggle room, and I kind of like this sort of angle because the first way I did it, I'm getting a really straight up and down pink piece, and I don't want that. So I'm going to go this way and I get more of a wedge. I get a fairly large bit of it down here, but that's okay. I'm happy with that. Okay, so once you have your ruler right? I'm looking at 10 and a half, 10 and a half. Once you have your ruler where you want it to be, I don't know if I've done my hang loose with you, but hang loose. I'm right-handed. So I'm going to put my thumb and my pinky off the ruler, holding it in place, and then my fingers on top of the ruler helping to hold it in place. But it's really the thumb and the pinky doing the work. And I'm going to go from the bottom up and then right to left. If you are a left-handed person, it's just simply the opposite. You're going to go hang loose on your right hand, and then you're going to have your ruler lined up so that you can make your fresh cut from the bottom up on the left-hand side and then left to right. So I've got a nice fresh cut there. I'm going to flip this around and make my 10 and a half inch, right? Nicely lined up on the 10 and a half inch mark. Do my hang loose with my fingers holding it in place and go ahead and cut from there. Again, keeping the scraps, not the little trimmings, but the scraps. So there is the block, right? Depending on how much extra fabric you have, you can play with where the ray goes. Remember, I'm going to have a seam allowance that will bring this in a little bit more, so the pink won't be as huge, but I did get more of a wedge look by moving the ruler and playing with it there. So that is block number 8 of the Quilters Playcation Adventure Sew Along Rainbow Edition for 2024. So I'm going to move you now. Say goodbye to the ladies for this week. It won't switch. There I am. Back to my lovely mug. Here, let's put our blocks up on the wall. I'm actually going to lower this just a touch. Right, we have our block there. We'll get this one a little bit out of the way. Oh, we got the dropsies today. So we can get another idea of how this is coming together as we proceed. Now again, remember, oops, you can't see that. Remember, you can play with where the orientation of these blocks is. You know, maybe I want to go this way. I kind of like that. We're getting some kind of interesting effects. So you can play around with how that's going to go. You have that freedom. It's your quilt. You have that freedom. So that's it for me this week, week 8. Glad you're here with me. I'm so enjoying this. I got to tell you, when I had insomnia, last week was brutal for insomnia. Friday came around, I was barely functional, short temper, like it was just awful. Yay, perimenopause. I'm not going to show you because I won't pull down my pants, but I got the patch. Estrogen baby. Let's see how this works. Just started it last night, so ask me in a few weeks how I'm doing. Hopefully I'll be sleeping better, and I have slept better since Friday, but I was a zombie. And so when I couldn't sleep that one night and I got up and I came into the sewing room and I was like, I can't do anything that requires thinking, like, at all. But I needed to stand because my legs were bothering me, and I just thought I'll sew. And so I'm like, oh, I'll assemble these rows. It was no challenging sewing. And it made me so happy to see all of these coming together. I was really seeing my vision for how things were going to be. Yeah, just super, super exciting. So thank you for being along with me. Thank you for continuing to inspire me. I hope I can do the same for you. We'll see you next week, folks. Bye, everybody.